Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer, and this is Write Better Stories. My son Pringle is climbing up the tripod of the camera, so he might make an appearance later. But today we are going to talk about the film The Love Witch. I saw this on the Criterion channel the other day, and my thing with Criterion movies is that sometimes they're awesome, and sometimes they're really boring. And this one, just by the thumbnail, I could tell was going to be really awesome because the thumbnail was a woman on her back on a pentagram, presumably in a ritual scenario. So I had a feeling this was going to be cool, and it was. So just a little bit of stylistic background on this is that it was shot in it was shot in 2016, but it's made to look like it was shot in the 1960s. And apart from any kind of stylistic flourish for the film, I think that this really supports a lot of the things that they are investigating. Things like traditional gender roles, maybe outdated forms of sexual expression, and everything in between. I'll get more into that a little bit later. But yeah, I don't know too much about cinematography, so that's as much as I can say. But I do think that this style does support the ideas that the film is investigating. But the main reason I wanted to talk about it is that it very successfully implements the idea of character action driving the plot, which is an idea that I've tried to harp on this channel quite a bit. So I think that if you were like me, you were interested in writing not just to get a fun, Back to the Future type plot inside of your story, but you want to play with some ideas. I think that a lot of people get interested in writing because they read that thing that has all of these interesting themes and symbols going on. But what happens is that when you're inspired by these very cerebral stories or stories that are not what they appear, it can be difficult to actually write a straightforward story after that. And I think that maybe for me in particular, when I was reading some of these kind of crazier stories in college, I thought that just because I understood them, that I understood these more traditional forms that they were trying to subvert. So it was like, I'm reading this postmodern crazy stuff. That means that I understand a straightforward narrative. And I have learned through trying to write my own narratives that that's not necessarily true. And maybe not enough attention has been paid on how to take these big ideas and then deliver them in a very digestible, even traditional way. But all of that is to say, The Love Witch is very successful at doing that, exploring these high-minded ideas in a very digestible, straightforward, even traditional plot. And so, the plot of The Love Witch is as follows. That's a bad way to say it. The plot of The Love Witch is completely driven by the main character action of our main character. So her name is Elaine, and she is a witch. But what's interesting about her is that her characterization and her delivery of lines is very Stepford Wives. She is very explicit about the fact that she wants the love and attention of a man, and that if she can just sexually gratify her man, then everything will go well for her. So the way that she achieves this is by making love potions that make them fall head over heels in love with her to the point that they're reduced to these blubbering little needy boys, and then they eventually die. So just to make a more concise point about that, is that her dominant character action in the film that not only defines her character but drives the plot forward is the fact that she makes love potions that men drink and then fall in love with her. That is a very, very clear, straightforward character action. I think too often when people think of character actions, they think of maybe something more background, or you'll be drafting your character bio in your little notebook and you'll be like, my character likes mint chocolate chip ice cream, and then that doesn't factor into the story at all. So I think it's important to really draw your attention to the fact that if you're making these decisions about these characters and giving them character traits to try to flesh them out, it shouldn't just be something to have in your back pocket so that you see them better as a writer. It should be something that actually ends up in the story. And not only does it end up in the story relies on this information about the character. So again, in The Love Witch, it's not just that in her free time, when she's not in the film, she likes making these potions, is that the entire movie and the progression of scenes that makes it make sense from one scene to lead into the other is totally an investigation of this main character action that she has. She gives men these potions, they drink them, and then they are changed and they fall in love with her. So that would be a good test to see if your character action inside of your script or your outline or your story or whatever it might be, to see if it's good or not, is does your story actually rely on this character action? Now, you don't have to do that, but I think that if you did do that, nobody would complain. It would just make it so much easier to talk about your story to understand where its flaws are. And let me see if I can give you an example. If I told you maybe this is the bad way to talk about the Love Witch. So then we get this girl, and she's like driving on a road, and then she gets like pulled over, and then she like goes and talks to her friend, and then this, and then that, you know, and it's like that doesn't really give you anything to grab onto. But then what if I told you the Love Witch is about this? The Love Witch is about a witch that gives potions to men that make them fall in love with her. That was so quick, and that is the dominant investigation of the Love Witch. So I have found myself trapped many times by people pitching their movies to me, and sometimes it's a very good experience, but more often than not, it's a terrible experience that makes you feel trapped in the conversation. And usually it's because they went with that former way of describing the movie to me. This thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then I feel myself getting tense. It's like, oh, just give me something to hold on to. You can't just give me this sequence of events and then hope that I will extract something from it. I think that this is the benefit of coming up with a log line for your film, and you can do that by determining the character action. So, my reaction to this film in general is that it doesn't necessarily give you a very clear final statement or conclusion about the ideas that it's playing with. It's more that it took all of these traditional modes of gender expression and sexual expression and gender roles, put them in a blender, and just kind of blended them around. So I don't think that this is a bad thing at all. And in fact, I think that a film doing this is very successful, whereas if you were to be writing an essay, that would be a bad thing to do, is just blur all the concepts to the point that up is down and left is right and you don't understand anything. But what's cool about The Love Witch is that it does give you this traditional mode of gender roles and sexual expression, and then sort of shows you that these concepts perhaps are not as clear as they appear. For example, the traditional sort of thought about sexual relationships between men and women is that a man would initiate and the woman would be deferential to the man, giving him a yes or no, maybe being more submissive in that context. But this is sort of flipped on its head, is that we've got Elaine, who, even though she's very Stepford Wives in her characterization and her speech, she's a witch that ends up like killing all of these guys. So we sort of get what the traditional femininity would have us believe about women, and then there's this shadow side or this underbelly to it. And likewise, I think for men, we do get that there are these like cool, hot guys in the film, but then they're reduced to these blubbering little boys that almost need a woman as a sexual partner to be more like a mother that takes care of them, rather than this object of desire or the prize as the sexual or the traditional sexual narrative would go. Yeah, that's, I think what ends up being so successful about this film is that through this older 1960s style and these psychedelic love sequences where they're presumably tripping on these love potions, it blurs these traditional concepts of who's the initiator, who is the submissive one in the relationship. And since she's killing these men, I think you could almost look at this as sort of like a revenge Django Unchained sort of angle, that traditionally women have been oppressed and been, sexually maligned. And we could look at this as being like, yeah, but now the women have the power. And I think that's a perfectly acceptable way to look at it. However, it does seem to be a little bit more complex than that, because I'm not convinced that Elaine wins and that she like rides off into the sunset at the end being like, haha, now I'm the one with the power. It's almost as if she then becomes the initiator, the aggressor in the sexual relationship, and then that comes with its own bag of tricks, its own net positive and net negative, a new role for her. So, I think I'm going to leave it at that today, just to keep this video under 10 minutes. I think that my overall interpretation of this film might be a bit of a cop-out, but it's more of that the director and writer built this object that is so rife for interpretation, but we're just a little bit at a loss as to what the actual Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? What the final statement might be, what the conclusion of all of these ideas might be. But again, that's actually a good thing. It more blurs these traditional modes of understanding gender roles and sexual relations between men and women. And I think it can help you write better stories. And that's the point of this channel anyway. Well, I think Lawrence liked that one. This is Pringle. He finally makes his appearance. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.